Okay, we know about the ill effects of patriarchy on the lives of women. Those of us who didn't know about it got to know a little bit more about it during the course of the day, and I suppose we'll get to know a lot more about it in the course of tomorrow. But an often ignored aspect of patriarchy is how it shapes and traps men as well, yours truly included. Is being a stud, I was chatting with Barka in the wing a little earlier, and the question was, is being a stud the only way to be manly? I think the answer is no, right? Yeah. Whether we guys know that the answer is no, I'm not sure. What's the word I'm supposed to say? Feminist. Okay. No, but truly, all jokes aside, it's a very pertinent question, as is the next one. Are men victims of patriarchy? It's a question we must ask ourselves. We must introspect for the betterment of all of us, right? I'm sure you agree with me. And you know, what would be the right thing to do? Would be to get a bunch of men to actually discuss this openly, debate it, you know, throw punches at each other, figure out what the answers are. Because as Barka said early in the day, We the Women is about women, but for men and women as well. For all of us to kind of introspect, indulge, speculate, discuss, and empower ourselves with knowledge that is deeper. So, I'd like to invite these gentlemen that I just spoke about. First of all, author Amish Tripathi. Let's have you on stage. Amish Tripathi. Ashish Patil of Yash Films. Here they are. Here's Amish. Let's give him a round of applause. Ashish Patil of Yash Films. There he is. Okay. Journalist Raghu Karnad. May we have you on stage, please? Here's Raghu. Let's give him a round of applause. And screenwriter Kersi Khambatta. Here he is. Okay. The gentlemen before you are going to be debating ways to make men a vital part of the feminist conversation. I said it again, Barka. Feminist conversation. I'm not. I find it easy. Feminist, 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 feminist. I will, if he's alive after what you did to him this morning. Okay, hand over to you, gentlemen. All yours.
You're forgetting the woman. This is appalling.
नहीं.
Exactly. क्योंकि फादर इंडिया नाम की कोई मूवी कभी बनी ही नहीं है ना.
Please welcome Nishta, who's going to be moderating the entire session. Here she is.
हम गाली दें तो हम assholes. इन्हें देखने से.
My apologies, Nishta.
See what happens when 5 men are on the stage. You forget the women and so conveniently. Well, that was just a joke. We have about 15 minutes with Amish, who has a flight, but there's a little clip that we'd like to show you, which I think is approximately about 3 minutes, and then we'll head on to the discussion.
मदर इंडिया देखिए?
हाँ.
फादर इंडिया?
नहीं.
Exactly. क्योंकि फादर इंडिया नाम की कोई मूवी कभी बनी ही नहीं है ना. छाया जाए. औरतें गाली दे तो वो फेमिनिस्ट है. हम गाली दे तो हम assholes. इन्हें देखने से भी प्रॉब्लम है.
What nonsense is this?
लड़कियों को हमेशा ऐसा क्यों लगता है कि पूरी दुनिया तुम्हारे पीछे पड़ी हुई है? That time of the month हर महीने आ जाता है.
Don't be insensitive. She's in pain.
So am I, sir. माँ की ममता सब जानते हैं, मगर बाप की ममता तो कुछ होती नहीं. Fact, this life is a war between chest and breast, and breast always wins.
बहुत हो गया. अब हमको चांस दो. हमको उनकी जगह पे रखो, उनको हमारी जगह पे रखो, फिर देखो हम ये फेमिनिज्म के आंसू नहीं रोएंगे.
चंचल मन अति रैंडम.
लड़का है, अपनी औकात में रह. तुम लड़कों को क्या लगता है कि दुनिया की सारी लड़कियां रेपिस्ट है? लड़की देखी नहीं कि बच्चा बच्चा.
क्या बोल रही है ये?
फिसल गयो रे.
You're a boy. ये सब तुमसे कैसे हो पाया?
वो मेरा पीछा कर रही है.
तुम जेपी रोड पे ये कपड़ा पहन के क्या कर रहे थे?
जेंडर इक्वालिटी करता हूँ.
यकीन नहीं होता अब ये सब मेरा.
If you like bananas, come with me because I'm a kela.
Did that really happen?
I will never be more than a cute face and I'm part for guys.
I'm so sorry. लड़का हुआ है.
फिसल गयो रे.
What a wonderful clip. Ladies and gentlemen, since morning, on every single session, there's been one question that we've been thinking about and we've all been asking. Where are the men? So here are the men, to my right and to my left. We're going to try and, I'm under tremendous pressure to keep this light and humorous. It doesn't naturally come to me. But because Amish is in a rush, I'm going to ask him the first question. Amish, I'm going to just set the context. And we had a little parallel session going on before this. On a very serious note, I think we've all, in a certain way, over the last few years, felt almost tangibly the change in the gender paradigm. However, it wouldn't be an overestimate to say that it has been evaluated from the very premise, from the feminist premise of patriarchal privilege. I know these are very complex words. What we're essentially asking is, in the discourse right now, and at UN Women and the work that we do, we engage and we are very, very conscious to include men and their voices, and boys and men, in the conversation. In a little joke that we were all sharing behind screen, we were saying, Barkha and I are probably going to come together in another decade and set up a platform called We the Men. Are we there? Amish, this is my first question to you. India is going through a paradigm change, so is the rest of the world. But here we are to talk about how patriarchy in itself is a trapping for men as much, probably slightly lesser because there is a male privilege. But I'm going to let you answer that. Do you feel trapped and left out in the current discourse?
I think the best answer for that is the reason why I need to leave early. I was actually supposed to leave at around 4:35, and Barkha called me yesterday or day before yesterday, 2 days ago. And you can understand the feminist pressure on me that, of course, that flight was cancelled, and I have another flight to catch now to get to a speaking engagement in Delhi. No, there's no male privilege here. But okay, like on a serious note, what I do want to say is, we have to appreciate that men and women are not two different species. We are from the same species. And there are, in every system of thought, whether it's patriarchy or matriarchy, there are, it's not that anyone is pure good or pure evil. Actually, that is the Indian way. One of the things that perhaps that we were discussing, and we should bear in mind, is that there should be a sense of values to drive the equality between men and women. This is extremely important. A society cannot achieve its full potential till we find that equality. Our ancient scriptures themselves say the gods abandon the land where women are not respected. But one of the problems with the Western way is that they tend to swing from one extreme to the other and then swing back once again. And they don't have a sense of balance. All I would request is we should have a sense of balance when we approach issues of men and women. No one should belittle the massive issues that women face in India today. But there are, the standard paradigm that we have now causes, a problem for many men as well. Like we were just discussing that if a man actually wants to make a choice that he doesn't want to work, he actually wants to stay at home, society makes it very, very difficult for him. And what's wrong if he does want to choose that approach to life? So we should have a sense of balance when we approach the debate. I think that's a key submission I would make.
Absolutely. Who can deny balance? Raghu, I'm going to come to you. We see the entire discourse on masculinity not as a continuum, but as even within masculinity, men and men, there is more acceptance of this one kind of man. But films, literature, everything has spoken about different kinds of men. And I personally, at a household level, think that some of the choices I make at a very personal, individual level is because there's somebody else to bear the burden of the other. So it immediately looks like a choice. Would you have something to say about that from your own personal experiences?
I'm just going to start off being a little bit a little bit combative and disagree with Amish because I personally don't feel especially.
That's a problem with men. We never stick together.
We do. I don't personally feel that that we need to be especially concerned about balance at this moment. I think what we need to do is we need to throw our weight behind somewhat behind some developments that feel a little risky, because frankly, I think it's always difficult to experience change. Look, sometimes whenever I get asked how I interpret feminism and what feminism means to me, the best answer that I can give as a man is that it's very apparent to us from the headlines every single day, and it's very apparent even from what we can see in front of our eyes, that like relations between men and women are not very healthy. There's a kind of there's a state of ill health right now. I think of it as being a question of fitness. When we think about our own health, we work very hard and we put a lot of actual effort into assuring our own fitness and into making our physical health and our mental health good, And sometimes that requires a kind of exercise. It requires effort and it can require discomfort too. If you want to be fit, you have to experience a little bit of discomfort. To me, it's the same with moving towards better health in our gender relations, in our relations with the women in our lives, women we work with, the women who we are related to, the women who we might be married to. If you're not experiencing some amount of discomfort, if you're not a little bit outside of your comfort zone, you're probably not actually getting any healthier. That's my theory, and that's my experience. That's how I am trying to respond to the current moment. But this doesn't mean that men have to feel sort of sad and wounded about it, because I think the interesting thing to appreciate, and I think what I'm most interested in talking about when I read this panel title, is what it is about patriarchy or about masculine expectations that men suffer from too. I think that this is what we can all. This is a very healthy starting point. Is that men suffer from masculine demands as well, and the ways they suffer often lead to women, having to suffer those things as well.
Do you feel at the receiving end of it?
Now, I've been lucky in a lot of ways, and I wouldn't have ended up on this panel, I think, if I hadn't. If I was one of the men who got the really sort of sharp end of the masculinist stick, but everyone feels it. We've all felt it at different stages of our lives. We've felt it as preteens and as teenagers, and we felt it as young men. The demands and the kind of competitive world in which men are expected to be a certain way. So I'll tell you a story, and then I'll give up the mic to someone else. This summer I was visiting a friend's house, and I was looking through his bookshelves, and I picked out a book that was called The Wisdom of Psychopaths. Okay, so this is like a business self-help book, The Wisdom of Psychopaths. I've forgotten what the author's name is. So the theory of this book is that psychopaths, we all know what psychopaths are, but then there's also something called a functional psychopath. A functional psychopath is someone who has some of the traits of a murderous psychopath, but is essentially single-minded and not especially empathetic, and doesn't sort of waste too much time on their and whose conscience is limited. And this was being promoted as a mode of success. So we can learn from psychopaths, and this was very clearly being marketed to men. And I thought, well, okay. I was reading this book, and I was like, well, oh, great, fine, psychopaths. I'll be like a psychopath. And then I thought, well, that actually doesn't sound like it's either going to work as a route to success, or be very good for me. But it did seem to describe very well how our culture. Not all men are going to turn out like this, and men are always going to be different people, just as all people are different. But it seemed like a good way of capturing how our culture is at some level telling men they need to behave in order to be successful.
That's interesting. Amish, I'm going to come back to you. So, and we were discussing this behind the scenes. He spoke about a book that was particularly marketed to men because there's a certain way of masculinity which is to be detached, which is to be not emotional. We have a campaign which on men don't cry. But when you go back to ancient literature, you look at a very different notion of masculinity in itself, which was far more diverse than what we have right now. Did we go through the Anglicization or did we import a different kind of patriarchy?
Yeah, actually, if you read, it's one of the misfortunes of India that we don't teach much of our ancient literature, our ancient plays in our education system, because that portrays a very different image. So, in ancient India, for example, it was men and women were treated as equals. Our most ancient scriptures, the Rig Veda, there are hymns written in the Rig Veda by women rishikas, and that's the equivalent of prophets and messiahs in ancient times. That was the status of women in ancient India. If you see the way the love stories were portrayed in ancient India, you read the plays of Kalidasa, of Bhasa, of Sudraka. It's a very equal interpretation. We were just discussing about the purusharthas that were there in ancient life, and there was a perspective that that one of the four main purusharthas that all men and women had to try and achieve to lead a good life was kama, all the sensual pleasures of life, and it was a very liberal, equal way. We had women queens, we had women warriors. You see that in many of our stories. Unfortunately, we don't teach that in our modern education system. So the archetypes that enter the minds of our students and the minds of so many generations post-independence are not in alignment with the way our ancient education, the kind of equality that it preached. And this is something unfortunate. Yes.
But Amish, do you not think that even in ancient literature, while in parts this is true, it was also masculinity was still a very continued performative experience, which means you had to perform like a man on an everyday basis, and a certain part of that really was some of the things that you spoke about. Why is it that we're so surprised today, or where we are, in terms of, we saw this coming, we saw this grooming, and we did nothing about it?
No, but the key point was there was freedom to discover your Swadharma. So in the Mahabharata, there's this tale of a king called Bhangashwan. He was a male, and he changed his gender to a woman. And he discovered that he enjoyed life far more as a woman. And this was celebrated. He had his freedom of choice to follow it, and this wasn't thought of as something wrong. So you had the right to discover your own way of life. And look, it's one of the things that we were discussing, that there are different forms of masculinity as well. We shouldn't tar all forms of masculinity. There are some forms which are positive, which help society. So, but as long as everyone has the right to choose the kind of life that they choose to follow. And this was a part of our ancient way. One can debate over when our society started changing. There can be various debates on that. But the main point I'm trying to make is you had the freedom to explore and find your own swadharma, your way of life which suited you. And this freedom was there for men and women. One of the ancient names of our country was Ilavarta. It was a land of Ila. Anyone knows who Ila was? No? That's so sad. Ila was a woman. She was a founder of the Chandravanshi clan. Okay? The Chandravanshi line of kings was among the most powerful line of kings and warriors. Lord Krishna was a Chandravanshi. The land was named after her. She was a woman, Ila. She later became a man called Ila. Okay? And she had the freedom to pursue that as well. Now, but she didn't found the Chandravanshis as a man. She founded the Chandravanshis as a woman. It tells you about the kind of society that we had. And that is something that we need to rediscover. I say this repeatedly. Those who fight for equal rights between men and women are not being Western. In fact, they're being truly Indian, because that is our true culture.
Ashish, you've been wanting to say something, but I do want to pose an additional question to you, and I'll come back to Kersi. a lot of what reaches people is really cinema. And we see a lot of cinema brings back and institutionalizes the family system, which inherently in India ensures a male privilege. Until very recently, where we see women-oriental films, but it's not really films of equality. It's about women finding their voice, but it's not still placed in a context of equality. Again, the other thing that I do want to pose to both of you is, given that India spent so much time in women exploring their agency, discovering their sexuality, in 2017, we're still making a film to teach women that their right is to say no, without teaching women the right to pleasure. Have we gone from progressive to regressive? Or have we regressed?
Hi, I'm Patil, and I'm not a feminist. The reason I say that is, it's a much abused term. Saying feminist, it almost sounds like the F word. It's almost scary. Because along with that come these visuals or notions of man-hating. And I think similar baggage comes with the term masculinity. And that's what makes conversations about gender always not just tricky, but interesting, because I think unfortunately what gender does is it lands up prescribing who we should be instead of describing who we are. And I think the way Amish very nicely kind of phrased out that the legacy has not been like that. And what has happened is I think over a period of time, we've all been conditioned that way. Like a great example of if you had to be a stay-at-home mom, like in the US, the numbers of stay-at-home dads has doubled. But if you were to attempt that here, there's a lot of stigma attached to it. It's like, "Arey, biwi ke paise pe jeeta hai." I think there's so much baggage that comes with being like that. So yes, those choices exist. But I think we've been conditioned over a period of time, like Raghu mentioned, across a lot of things and cultural touch points. So while the Rig Vedas, etc., have been a certain way, across pretty much as far as memory goes back, and it kind of is propagated across things in education. I mean, when you go to school, if there was choices on extracurricular, if there's home science and cooking, लड़के थोड़ी ना करेंगे. वो तो carpentry सीखेगा. Cooking, इसको सीख के क्या करना है? I mean, last I checked, that was a basic life skill. But it's just not looked at like that. Similarly, bulk of the advertising that you saw in the past, and before I even get to films, it's most moms in advertising were these super moms. वो रोटी भी सेक लेती है, वो कपड़े भी धो देती है, बच्चा बीमार हो गया तो वो आयोडेक्स भी लगा लेती है, और अगर बॉर्नविटा की मॉम हो तो वो बॉक्सिंग भी सिखा देती है. And who's the dad? His job is essentially वो newspaper पढ़ता है और 4 पकोड़े खाता है. And really, so it's almost like every mom in advertising has been a single parent without being a single parent.
Absolutely.
And that's how that notion has been propagated. And whenever guys kind of want to jump in, the phrases that they'll end up using is that I pitch in, I help out, I cook on Sundays, slow clap. I think that fundamentally that conversation, in fact, you mentioned something about he for she, and she for he as a campaign that the UN is doing. I find something fundamentally flawed with that as well. I don't think it should be he for she or she for he. It should be he and she. The conversation needs to move from that to sharing. And there's very little advertising or very little, content which has been really playing out like that, because it's just been like that forever. There's a really interesting, while we were on anecdotes, there's a really silly riddle. It's really dark, but it really cracks me up. When I was growing up in school, there's this riddle about this father and son who are driving to Pune on the highway, and their car meets with a horrible accident. The father dies. The son is rushed to the hospital, and this is funny, okay, I don't know why it makes me laugh. He's rushed to the hospital, he's pulled into the ICU, and the resident surgeon, the physician in charge, steps out and says, I'm sorry, I can't treat him. That's my son. How is that possible? And the bulk of the kids in my class were puzzled. Ye kaise ho sakta hai? It's his mom. I mean, duh.
Someone asked me that riddle, and I did not get the answer for like half an hour.
Shame on you. I just said mother.
Yeah.
Shame on you.
And that was his mom. And I'm glad you said that, Raghu, because
the challenge, conditioning. Even
and you know what?
I hope you guys all got that. It's a really good riddle.
Yeah,
Try it on people. If they're as
crazy.
stupid as I am, and most people are,
and strike them. Then
everyone will be like,
doctor could be his mother.
And we spoke about patriarchal privilege. The interesting thing about privilege is that it's invisible to those who have it. ये तो है मेरे पास.
Ashish, let me ask you a question, and let me pose it to all of you. Do you think the privilege is invisible? The fact that you can get down from a car, walk at 11, the fact that you can get off, and I can tell you a situation very, very recent. Not to say, I'm not promoting open defecation, for heaven's sake, I'm not. I was traveling from Delhi to Dharamshala, and I went and told the driver, I said, I want to use the washroom. He didn't stop for 4 hours. He didn't.
It's invisible for the men.
How is it invisible to the men? How is the privilege invisible? And why is it that we're feeling what makes the word feminist burdensome to you? What makes it? Point out
so
two
let me
things.
try and articulate that. So I think the reason I find that word burdensome is by design it's taking sides. I think I'd much rather phrase something like champion of human rights, champion of gender equality. I think by design you land up taking sides this way. And I think that privilege is taken for granted by men.
But Ashish, behind that is the fundamental and radical notion that women are human beings. Not half of the world doesn't agree with it. That's the problem.
Exactly what, so I'm not disagreeing with you. And in spite of the fact that there's 51% of the population which is women, 95% of CEOs in Fortune 500 companies are men. It's only about 10% of films which have, so to speak, women in central roles. You know, it's literally 10 to 15% in policy-making roles or in government. And there's something fundamentally flawed with that. I think that's also been a function of legacy. I think in the past, and I'm talking about like Stone Ages, what mattered for leadership and people who took leadership roles were people who were physically stronger. And there are some men who are physically stronger. My wife would whoop my ass. But today, for a leader, it's not about physical strength. It's about being creative. It's about being innovative. And then last I checked, there's no hormone which defines that. So I think that is what has changed. But I think people have not kept pace. And the bulk of the time, I don't think I want to play the part of being a victim of, you know, patriarchy or masculinity. That I'm feeling trapped. मुझे घर पे रहना था, लेकिन मुझे काम करना पड़ रहा है because the roles have been defined as मर्द पैसे कमाता है, बीवी खाना पकाती है. And I think it's been so ingrained, even when an employee, a female employee were to have a baby, there is maternity leave, but there's very little paternity leave. It's almost like you're communicating to people saying, tu paise kama, tu bacche ko paal. In some of the more progressive societies overseas, like Canada, there's a mandatory paternity leave. And some of the more, so to speak, happier
They make it flexible, that the
parents can alternate between
they can alternate. They can figure it out.
Can I just jump in with two really quick points?
So I think
responses.
I have to give,
then we'll give Kersi like the field.
Floor forever. Okay.
When I hear someone say that they're uncomfortable with the word feminism because they prefer a different term, and this one sounds like it's taking sides and it's got these associations and so on, I mean, I understand where that's coming from. And I've been in situations where I've been hesitant, you know, in the same way. But the fact is that is the word. Like there is no like champion of human rights that's like floating around. You know, that's not part of the lexicon right now. The lexicon that exists for advancing equality and rights for women is feminism. So what I can't help feeling when I see another man say, I'm not a feminist, that's not the word I prefer, but yes, but all of this, is that what you're actually doing is you're kind of preserving your own privilege in that situation. Because then you get to stand up for notional equality that's happening in, you know, that we had 2,000 years ago and that we'll have in the future and that should be in other people's boardrooms and so on. But you don't want to experience the discomfort of sitting there with another guy who might be like, oh, what a wuss, or whatever their reaction might be. So I mean, that's why what's really interesting about the challenge to us is not an intellectual thing. It's just about how, and this comes back to what I was saying about discomfort. It's like, are we willing to experience that discomfort of being like, all right, this word isn't perfect. Someone might, it might take me down a notch in someone else's view, but it doesn't matter because that's the word that describes what we're actually fighting.
I think, you know, Raghu, I don't think one is debating nomenclature at all. I think it's really what it stands for. I think the challenge with that term, and again, the intent is not to go into discussion on advertising and branding at all. I think fundamentally what it's landed up doing is leaving men out of the conversation. I think that's my concern, or that's my issue with that. I'm not, and yes, a lot of men resist gender inclusion because of the fear of being ridiculed by other men, or being considered a wuss, or wush, you know, and that's not it at all. And I think if we were to really have meaningful gender inclusion or gender equality, given that 50% of the population is men, and unfortunately, it's the level playing field right now is like that. And that's what happens to men, right? When water starts heading up, it's like, oh, shit, it's going uphill. Arey, my trappings of masculinity are screwing me over. So it's not really about the phrase, but I think the fact that it's leaving men out of the conversation, and that's where I don't think we've been able to make the kind of progress that we really need to make. It's about, call it whatever you want. Call it feminism, call it whatever you want, Humanism,
Ashish,
it's just terms.
1 second. Kersi, I'm going to come to that. When people say call it feminism or whatever, I think nomenclature is important because it truly conveys what needs to be changed and who that change is intended for. In the gender discourse, I mean, you've made some fantastic movies, particularly, I know we've talked about Finding Fanny, and there's this particular scene where she initiates the lovemaking process. It's not a process, but that scene. It's fantastic because it's breaking barriers right there. Do you feel still, and I know that people can't break barriers completely, and it takes time, and we all break and change in parts, and it takes us to fully be changed. Are you a feminist? Do you feel the burden of the word, and what does it mean to be a feminist?
Okay. First, I will replace masculinity with the word patriarchy. Because for me, masculinity is all about just the physical self. Patriarchy equals privilege equals power. Feminism, in my opinion, and that's why I would like to call myself a feminist, is because feminism is only asking for equality and nothing else. It's not saying, I want more than you. It's saying, I just want exactly what you have because I am equally intelligent, I'm equally capable, I'm equally competent. So why leave me out of the equation? So I'm totally for the word feminism, even though I am not part of the everyday discourse. I'm not, I'm sorry.
You're making brilliant films. You're a part of the everyday discourse.
And talking about this film, definitely, but let's move away from the fact that the woman initiated her first cherry-breaking moment, and let's talk about that idiot whom she broke her cherry with, she popped her cherry with. Now let's talk about that idiot for a moment. Now that idiot was handed a code book, a rule book by his father, saying, son, this is your rule book. This is what it means to be a man. That is a woman. These are your responsibilities. These are hers. If this chick jumps in, tell her, don't take any lip from her. This is what it means to be a man. And now what this leads to, and this is, I think this cuts across this entire country and large parts of the world as well, where these little idiots who are handed this rule book or this rule book by their father don't know how to act out these rules. And as a result of which, they never really become men. They just go through some prolonged purgatory of adolescence. And they just don't know how to be men. They don't know how to talk to women. They don't know how to talk to other men. They can't hold intelligent conversations. They are social retards. So that was the telling point more than the fact that the woman initiated the scene. And, that is the trap. So, in a sense, patriarchy emasculates men. So that is the trap. It doesn't teach you how to be a man. It doesn't teach you the first thing how to be a man. I mean, I could go on and on about it, but that's how I feel.
Amish, we're talking about a code book, a rule book, that is eventually, as per his admission, led to men being social retards. That's a joke. I don't think they're social retards. I don't think you're a social retard. I don't think any of us here are. But of course, it has trapped men in a certain...
I disagree. I think a lot of men are. I'm just gonna...
Social and sexual retards.
Yeah, let's move on from retard just so that we can...
I know.
I'm sorry to use that word.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an awkward word, really. But essentially what we're saying is products of a society where you're not groomed to deal with half of the population. Give us an example or a story of a rule book that has gone right, if at all there can be a rule book.
There is no rule book that lasts forever. Okay, so, and we by nature, we are a rebellious society. That's who we have always been. The way we behave now is actually perhaps a result of too many defeats, too much insecurity as a society, but we need to rediscover our rebellious spirit. And I'm so sorry, I really have to rush, so I want to end with one thought and a story. Okay, it's not about who you are outside, it's about who you are inside. That truly matters. We have two warriors out here from our armed forces who protect us, and we should all applaud for them. And what will matter to us and our society is the role models and the archetypes that we build up. Because then that becomes the benchmark that so many men and women go on, right? And we've had, since we're speaking of warriors, we've had great women warriors in our history, which we don't speak of at all. Our history is very Delhi, Northwest India, and male-focused. It does not cover the rest of the country, does not cover so many great archetypes and role models that we can learn from. Let me leave one role model with you, okay? Think of who was the first Indian ruler, first Indian person, okay, who actually defeated a European power in a land battle.
Rani Lakshmibai.
No, it was much later, okay? It wasn't a man, it was a woman. It was Rani Abakka, okay, from Karnataka. She was a Kodaga, right? The Portuguese attacked her. She had a husband who was, well, not really a supportive kind. The husband actually sided with the Portuguese. She defeated the Portuguese, kicked them out. She didn't kill her own husband because she thought, no, he's my husband. Legend goes that apparently she shaved off his mustache and his hair and sent him packing. So the legend goes. Now, this is a warrior we should be celebrating. There are many warriors like this. Rani Durgavati, for example, the Gond Queen. There are many warriors like this who can be archetypes and role models for us who we don't celebrate. This is just one example. There are many examples that can be learned from. Prophet Muhammad's wife, Lady Khadija, was a businesswoman. He was actually her employee. This is something that, again, most people aren't aware of. Why don't we speak of these examples? These are role models that we can learn from. And these aren't anti-male role models. They're just role models which show that who you are inside is what truly matters. And the importance of archetypes in our education system is extremely important. We have another fantastic archetype out here, a sportswoman, and we should be celebrating these archetypes and role models. That's what will truly make a difference to our society. And I'll end with this. They should be our role models, our archetypes from India, because that's what will truly make a difference. When we put some foreign role model, not belittling them, of course we should celebrate them too, but they will not connect with most Indians because they'll say the obvious thing, Maro Su, what does it have to do with me? Okay? Okay, that's a thought I want to leave with. I'm so sorry. I really got a rush because I have another speaking engagement in Delhi. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful having you, Amish. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 10 more minutes and we'll take the last word really and then open up for questions. Ashish, do you want to shift chairs so that I don't look like I'm sitting? Yes. Next. Are you leaving your wallet? No. Oh, Jesus, I was just so happy for a second. I'm going to come back to you again with some of the things Amish said. We have our own role models, and this is my problem. Whenever and this has been a problem since morning in some of the sessions that at least I've heard. Whenever we talk about gender equality, we talk about these 5 or 6 women who've made it really in life, who are really at the forefront. And we talk about why gender equality is important because look what a woman can do. Isn't gender equality fundamentally important? Like, for example, the entire campaign of why you must save the girl child is because of what women can be. Let's say even if someone has a failed child, we're still talking about an equal world. The reason for women to exist is not because they're successful and they can lead a forefront. The fundamental reason is because the notion is they're human beings, they have exactly the same intelligence, the same rights as you, and therefore. So why do we always talk about celebrating women when we talk about gender equality? Even if they're uncelebrated and they're normal, there is nothing called normal, but they're just as they are supposed to be, go to work, come back, live a normal life, we still need them.
Yes, of course. I don't think anyone's going to really debate that, why they're important, because they're half the world's population, right? And I think there are enough studies and statistics that can tell you gender inclusion, bringing them into the workforce will benefit countries, will benefit companies, will benefit your kids, will benefit families, and it will benefit the man. I think there are statistics that tell you that. And I think that's one of the very critical, empowering pieces that we need to talk about or think about. When we talk about role models, the role models for that need not just be women. If only there could be the right male role models who've propagated those values. And I think a lot of things boil down to economics, like you spoke about, why aren't there enough women-centric films? I think some of it boils down to eventually economics, that what kind of business will it generate or not. I think the minute we are able to have the economic benefits outweigh the negative chatter around these things, like the conversation we had about, there's no longer stigma attached. If you're a stay-at-home dad, मैं बीवी के पैसे पे जीता हूँ is not an issue. I think there are way more women who can be way better gainfully employed and add a lot more value back to society and more.
I'm going to ask you a counter question. This is exactly the point that I made a couple of minutes ago. Why is talking about gender equality subject to good economics? Let's say it's bad economics for a change. I don't agree. I fundamentally disagree that it's bad. It couldn't be bad economics to include half the world. Why is it subject? And there was a session in the morning where everybody was talking about women in the workplace, and there was so much a conversation about merit. Suddenly when we're talking about women, we're talking about merit. Suddenly when we talk about the women's reservation bill in the parliament, we talk about, oh, will there be women of merit? All the men in the parliament are not there on merit. Why is it? Why suddenly is the conversation on good economics so pronounced when it comes to gender equality?
I think you're onto something, and frankly, I think it's an attractive direction which to take any conversation about equality, because it is very far removed from our individual lives, and you know. I'm sorry to keep hitting this note again and again, but if there's a message that I have thought about a little bit and I'm confident enough to share with men in the audience, it's that, you know, you don't have to actually worry too much about legislation. You don't have to worry too much about the national wage gap. We should worry about that. We should be aware of it. But this stuff definitely starts at home, and it really starts by examining how it is and asking some tough questions to ourselves. You know, we might want to ask questions about the wage gap or the economic disparities that exist within our own families. Those exist, those are real, and it's kind of, I mean, you might get labeled a feminist, or you might have to carry an uncomfortable label for a moment in your head just to ask that question. But if you ask your partner, and this is true across economic classes, you might get an interesting question. But with the first step that we can valuably take is absolutely about our own lives. Very quickly,
absolutely.
I think one of the most educational experiences I've ever had was when I was in college. Of course, in college, everyone's politics are perfect, and everyone is very advanced. So we were sitting around, we knew everything, and we were talking about how sort of enlightened we were, politically enlightened, and we were having a conversation about gender and so on, and about how important it was, how important feminism was. It was that at some point I actually realized, and I think it was the first time I realized this in my life, that I was only talking to the other guys in the group and not so much to the women. And the reason that was happening was because we were passing the conversation between each other with our eyes. So this happens. When you're sitting in a group, you kind of cue each other to speak by who you look at, and you look at different people in different conversations. And I suddenly realized, in fact, I realized this a little bit later when I went and checked in on a friend, on a woman friend to ask her what had happened, and I found her that she was in her room and she was crying because she hadn't failed to notice that at all. You know, she studied this stuff, but she still couldn't get a word in a conversation that was about gender relations with four dudes who were supposedly her friends. I never forgot that, but and I was amazed that it had taken me so long to realize that it was even happening. So I really think the really interesting conversations we can all start having are the ones about just how about what feminism means in our drawing rooms when we're sitting around with the group, having drinks, not having drinks, who gets up to pick up pakoras, and even that's still a parody. It's in every situation and in every relationship that it's a valuable question and an interesting one, and not one to really be afraid of, you know.
Absolutely. Kersi, you want to?
No, I just wanted to actually answer your question. I think this whole thing of economics, the reason why men are positioned as essential to the good functioning of economics is a very short-term, myopic point of view. Now, I'm just going to state the obvious. I mean, just for the sake of argument, if you break up the world into 3.5 billion men and 3.5 billion women, and if you consider that you're not even tapping into the resources of 3.5 billion people with equal intellect, capability, and just competence, how can it be good for economics in the long run? It's just not possible. It's not feasible. So you can scale it up to a household, or you can scale it up to the entire planet. I'm going to sound hippy-dippy and tree-huggy here for a moment, but I think the reason that this planet is in such deep shit is because of this disparity. We haven't tapped into the immense resources that 3.5 billion people on this planet have. We are ignoring them. We are relegating them to deciding what bloody detergent their child has to use, or what cooking oil they have to use for their bloody husband's health. I mean, how regressive is that?
Those are important questions. I mean, I don't think their resources are not being tapped. I think they're being tapped a lot.
Not enough.
They just don't have, it's just that we're tapped in completely separate ways that we don't get to choose.
It's just not enough. I mean, it's just wrong. This economic thing is very short term, like everything else. Like this whole concept of patriarchy and inequality is myopic.
Is myopic. Absolutely.
It is. I mean, there's no doubt about that. If feminism means equality, then that's what we should be striving for. There's no doubt in my mind about that.
I have passive-aggressive signals from Barkha's team to conclude the panel, but last, very quick, 20 seconds. What does feminism mean to you? What would you change about the process of change, if at all?
I think you can call it feminism, but don't call it that if you don't want to. Just make sure it's in your head under some label. Treat it like going to the gym, okay? If it isn't hurting you a little bit, you're probably not doing anything, And it doesn't hurt to actually devote. If you're trying to improve something in your life, it doesn't happen automatically. It doesn't happen by making an intellectual decision. It takes a degree of work, and it takes a degree of time. It wouldn't be the most ridiculous thing in the world if everyone spent half an hour of their day trying to be, or trying to think, trying to exercise how their gender relations are and how they could be better. That's my theory.
Feminism equals equality. That's it. Preach the gospel. Talk about it all the time. Talk across any forum. Talk to patriarchal men. Talk to idiots. Talk about how it is ultimately beneficial for you, for any organism to have a healthy male and female energy running it. That's it. That's what feminism means to me.
I like the nuance between patriarchal men and idiots. Ashish.
I think step one really to address this primarily is to acknowledge the fact that there is a problem. No one is to blame for the problem, but I think everyone is responsible for the solution. I think that's really, really, and everyone. One. Two, yes. I think fundamentally it starts with education, and I don't mean the definition of education in the traditional school book, academics, theory, practicals, in your curriculum. I think that education should be at work, should certainly be at home, and obviously in schools. Three, I think you do need to bring women into an active workforce. So I don't think it's an instead of conversation when you talk about economics, but I think that's and by economics, it's not just about financial impact. It's the overall beneficial impact of 50% of the world's population, which is not being sufficiently tapped into. That's critical. But all of these things are very macro things which will have a slow burn impact. Hopefully 5 years, 10 years from today, we won't need a panel like this. We won't need to have a We the Women conversation like that. But I think the immediate micro opportunities for each one of us, and I mean not just men, also the women, to go back home and just pull back and look at how are the traditional feminine and masculine roles playing out or defined in your house. If you can just do one thing starting this evening to share that load, both ways, this panel will be dead.
And UN Women will be out of business, which we are very happy.
It's a very short anecdote, I'll really keep it to 15 seconds or less. When I was a kid, we had a little gas cylinder fire in our house. My father, my very patriarchal father, very well-meaning man, lovely man, patriarchal father, ran around like a gibbering idiot. My mother just wrapped a wet towel around her hand, reached right into the fire, and just put it off. That was it. So what roles are anyone playing here? I mean, it's just nonsense.
I'd love to close the panel on a moment of agreement where we all think, and I'm happy that all of us are on the same page, that this change is not just an intellectual discussion or a decision that you make. It really is a moment of change in how practically and pragmatically we live our private lives, and we behave and conduct ourselves in public spaces, and of course the change that we make and influence and inform those around us. Well, I have in parts agreed that we have been democratic about the change process. In parts, I think the women's movement, each one of us could be more consultative before we swing to the other end and realize that we have come one step beyond equality. But we have many decades away really from that point, and I think we must go through the force. And I said it in the morning, I'm going to say it again. This is the first time in the history of mankind that gender equality is a real possibility. And I think there's a huge onus on each one of us. I'm happy men are standing up. I know there are times when you might feel at the receiving end of what is slightly discomforting, but it's discomfort for the greater good of mankind and for the years that probably some of us will see, and of course, our generations to come will see. Thank you so much for being such a patient audience. I would love to take questions until Barkha's team throws me out. And Barkha's right behind the door waiting. I can see you from the side, Barkha. We have no time for questions. I'm so sorry, but some of us are going to be around probably, and we'd love to take questions bilaterally. I'm so sorry I'm making the commitment on behalf of each one of you. Thank you so much.
Plenty of time for the guys. Thanks, Nishta.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.